Hey guys, this is Bottom, and today we're going to be talking about game theory. Game theory. And this is discussion part 2. So last time, I gave you an approach, or I explained how I approach games and what my strategy is going in. So my strategy was to start with an equilibrium strategy, and then to quickly move to a maximally exploitative strategy, and the maximally exploitative strategy that exploits my opponent, of course. And so this is sort of a general procedure that you want to start off somehow defensively and just try and observe your opponent. But then as soon as you see even something that might be exploitable, to quickly exploit it as hard as you can, because even if your guess is wrong, even if the data you got initially was a little bit misleading, it's unlikely, or it's just as likely to help you as it is to hurt you. You're not going to get exploited randomly. You're as likely to get exploited randomly as you are to randomly exploit them. So you shouldn't be scared of making guesses. But there's a caveat to the first statement, which is what this video is about. And the caveat are so-called population tendencies. So what is a population tendency? A population tendency is when your population as a whole tends to play in a certain way. So I'll write that down. So when I say a population, I mean a player base, right? So or a part of a player base. So it's a tendency for a part of a player base to play in a certain way. All right, let me give you some examples. So here's, of course, the rock, paper, scissors example, the mandatory rock, paper, scissors example at this point. This is a story. I once played rock, paper, scissors against a friend of mine. She just randomly asked me to play rock, paper, scissors, and I said sure. And she thought for a while, and I thought for a while, because this was a serious game of rock, paper, scissors. And then I threw rock, and she threw paper, and I lost. And she told me immediately that she had read somewhere that men tend to throw rock. And when I say this, I mean they throw it more than any other throw. So the correct exploitative strategy is to throw paper all the time. And she beat me. So who knows, right? So the point is that she was exploiting a population tendency. I mean, when you look at the strategy that I approached, start with an equilibrium strategy, and then quickly move to a maximally exploitative strategy, she was already at step 2 somehow, right? But she didn't go through the bit where she was doing 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. She was just immediately trying to exploit what I was doing. But how is, we had never played rock, paper, scissors before, right? We never played against each other. So the way that she tried to exploit me was by relying on the fact that I was part of a bigger population, or I was in some demographic that tends to play in a certain way. And she took this narrow edge and tried to exploit that. And whether or not this is reasonable or valid is kind of besides the point. I mean, I think that what she did was smart and, good for her. And of course, there was some chance that I didn't throw a rock, but that's okay. I mean, she was playing the odds by throwing paper here. She was saying, even if there's a 34% chance that I throw a rock, and I was supposed to like a 33% for the other two, she should throw paper 100% of the time. That's the correct maximally exploitative strategy against 34, 33, 33. And that's, if that's not clear, then you should make sure to make sure you understand that, because that's the sort of thing that from now on I'm going to be just stating. So this is an example of maximally exploitative strategy that's based on a population tendency. And so the idea is that you look at how some population plays, some demographic plays, and you exploit people in that demographic blindly, and you're slightly more likely to be right than wrong, because that's what a population tendency is. I mean, it means that if your player base as a whole plays in a certain way, each individual player is more likely to play in that way than not play in that way. Otherwise, your player base wouldn't play like that as a whole on average. I mean, it would go the other way. So there have been sort of more refined versions of this that have come out. I think there was some study that says that, in general, winners stay and losers switch. And moreover, they switch to what would have won. So if ever you're playing rock, paper, scissors, this is, and you wanna exploit some population tendencies, this is a good one to go for, I think, because I think this is pretty plausible. I haven't looked into it myself. So let's move on to another example. Let's move on to an example from Atlas Reactor. So this example is running into a bush. So when I say a bush, I mean like the spaces that you're invisible in, unless someone else is in there with you. The ones that when you shoot while you're in one, they turn red, and then they don't grant invisibility for the next turn. So that's a bush. And so suppose you have Nyx, right? Nyx is going to be our punching bag for the day. And you've got this bush here. So it's 3 spaces of bush. And he's 1 space up, right? So this is Nyx. And you see Nyx run into the bush here. And so remember that in Atlas Reactor, people have 4 squares of movement, right? So he could actually be in any of these, right? He could go 1, 2, 3, 4, or he could go just 1, 2, and then stop. He doesn't have to use his full movement. So the question is, if you have to shoot one of these 3 squares, and you're trying to hit Nyx, and Nyx is almost dead. He's really low on life, and you want to get the kill. Maybe it's turn 20. You got to guess right. So the question is, which square do you shoot? Where do you think he is? Well, okay. So in my experience playing Atlas Reactor, I mean, I've played just over 1,000 games by now. I would say that if you're in a normal ranked game, in a normal solo queue game, Nyx is going to be here. He's going to be in this square all the time. Or not all the time, but very often. So the Nash equilibrium is, of course, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Right? That if he wanted to be unexploitable, he would do 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. But he's not like this. The population tendency is, I would guess, it's something like 1198 or something like this. It's just everyone uses all of the movement all the time. Um, so this is maybe the strongest population tendency that I know in Atlas Reactor, and this might be a familiar situation for you, that you know that when you're in this situation, you should really shoot this bush. You should shoot the maximum distance. It's sort of the same thing with fades as well. That people tend to fade the 3 squares as much as they can. They very rarely fade 1 or 2 squares, even though sometimes it would do the trick. I mean, sometimes 1 or 2 squares isn't going to dodge your attack, but you know. And there's a good reason why this is the population tendency, is because for newer players, they'll see the indicator, right, the last known indicator over here, and so they'll think Nyx is here and they'll shoot here. So that's why this population tendency has evolved to be this way, is because when you go in and then you move as far as possible, you're taking advantage of the people who don't realize that this is possible. They're just people who are very new to the game. But the fact is that if you're playing against experienced players, you might want to think twice about doing this, because all the experienced players, if they see where you entered and they can count, I mean, they're all going to shoot here because they know that they know about this population tendency. They don't think of it in these terms, of course, but they know. And so that's, I think, an example of a strong population tendency. So my advice, right, going back to this, start with an equilibrium strategy and then quickly move to the maximum exploitative strategy. So the equilibrium strategy, when you're shooting into a bush, similarly, is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. That if you're playing against a Nash equilibrium robot playing Atlas Reactor, they would move to each of these squares, each with probability 1/3, and you should shoot each with probability 1/3, because otherwise this perfect robot thing is going to start exploiting you, and it's going to start moving to the bush you don't shoot at. Like, for example, if someone's really high level, they might move into this bush and then not move their full move, and then you're going to shoot here, and you're going to miss, and you had no chance of hitting them instead of a 1/3 chance of hitting them. So the Nash equilibrium for shooting is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, but of course I would recommend to players of Atlas Reactor to always shoot here, because the fact is the population tendency in Atlas Reactor is to always hide here when you can. And so that's an example of how you can use population tendencies to sort of skip the first part, which is the not very profitable part, where you're playing an equilibrium strategy, waiting and observing your opponent. And I said the reason you want to do this is because it reduces variance. And you can skip that unprofitable part. I mean, not that you're losing money, or that you're losing games, but you're not winning games. The part where you really take advantage of people is the second part, where you start exploiting them. And you can skip right to the exploiting if you exploit population tendencies.